I'm very excited to be hosting this first annual virtual career fair panel, where we are going to hear from two professionals about their experiences in their respective industries. I will be asking the panelists questions, and then there will be an opportunity for all of you in the audience to ask your questions at the end. So before we get started, I'll just go over a few housekeeping rules. Please send your questions in the chat, and I will send them to our panelists at the end. Very excited to have this be a collaborative discussion. And then please make sure you stay muted, and anyone who is not a panelist or who is not speaking, stay muted so that we can all focus on the discussion. All right, great. Now let me introduce our panelists. I'm so pleased to be joined by Frank Sanders, who is the Vice President for Global Procurement and Operations at Cisco, and Lyric Rivera, who is the owner of a business called Neurodivergent Consulting. And thank you both for joining us. Now let's dive into the questions. So first, I'd love to start by asking each of you to share a little bit about your background. And yeah, so we'll start there, just a little bit about your background.
Lyric, why don't you go first, if you don't mind?
Okay, yeah, sure, Frank, thank you. My name is Lyric Rivera. I am a late discovered, multiply neurodivergent adult. I'm autistic, I'm also ADHD, but that late discovered piece is really crucial to my life because I didn't know I was autistic and ADHD for the first 30 years of my life. I was diagnosed autistic at 29. So I'd already been in the workforce for a lot of years, over 15 years, because actually I started working in the family business when I was quite young, not knowing my brain. And something that became really obviously apparent to me as a neurodivergent person who gravitated towards leadership because it gave me more control over my environment, which that also made sense to me when I found out about my brain, is looking back, once I understood these differences, I could clearly see that my success and failure in all of these different environments I'd been in since I had entered the workforce depended very heavily on if my employers were flexible with me, or if they blamed me, or if they actually empowered me. And so as a neurodivergent leader, I took that to working on my own as a neurodivergent business consultant, helping other organizations who want to be more inclusive of neurodivergent people. So that's where I am today with Neurodivergent Consulting. But it all started from trying to survive a bunch of workplace systems without really truly understanding my brain, and getting to see so many ways it can be done wrong and also a lot of ways it can be done right.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that, Lyric. And I also think it's important for people to understand, my journey. Can't really explain clearly about how I got to where I am unless I talk about who I am at the core and where I came from. I've spent my career primarily on the West Coast, working in and around Silicon Valley. However, I grew up in Northern Illinois, a city called Rockford that's about an hour northwest of Chicago. And Rockford is a city, it's a relatively small city of about 150,000 people. Most people that I meet have never heard of the city, don't know it. But there's a couple stats about the city that are quite glaring. One is it's typically rated as one of the highest, most dangerous cities in the United States. Recently, it was rated as having the 8th highest rate of aggregated assaults among all cities, big and small. My upbringing, from the city was that if you were to visit there, you would actually find it in general a quite nice city. But the area where most of the crime happened was right in the center of where I grew up. And I often recall and reflect on my two best friends from grade school growing up. One has spent his life in prison for murder, and the other one spent pretty much the majority of his life in prison for drugs. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, same environments. And so I always feel quite fortunate that I was able to somehow take a different path. One of the things that was a turning point for me was when I first started high school. I was in all learning disability, all special education courses, and I wasn't doing very well. The environment wasn't that conducive to learning. The other kids wanted to mess around as much as I didn't want to learn. And quite frankly, the teachers didn't really care and they didn't want to teach. I got called out one day by a counselor and he told me that based on my entry exams that I should have been placed in the regular curriculum, which I thought was odd since I was failing in the one that I was in. But interesting enough, I did do better. The environment was a little bit better. Students were more serious. Teachers cared a bit more. Then he came to me again and said, based on my scores, they wanted to try me out in the honors curriculum, which I thought was really absurd. But interesting enough, I moved to the top of my class. The environment was way different. Other students were very serious, and the teachers really leaned into teaching and motivation. And ultimately, that enabled me to do well enough in high school to go into college and get a BS and an MS degree in engineering and then an MBA. And then after working as an engineer, I ultimately got into a career path related to supply chain and high tech. And today I'm one of the highest ranking African-American execs in the industry for what I do. I used to have to explain to people what supply chain was, but given the difficulty in getting goods by most through COVID, supply chain has now become front and center. And so I don't have to talk as much or explain as much to people about what it is. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's great.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing. And, speaking of your backgrounds and growing up and kind of how that shaped your experiences today, when you were younger, is this a career that you wanted to pursue?
I'll say first, no. This is Lyric. It was no for me. I wanted to be maybe an artist or a musician or something. I'm there's a stereotype that autistic people are all very nerdy and in tech, and while that's very true for some of us, a lot of us are also very creative and artistic, and I kind of am in like half between both of these places, I guess. I don't fit either stereotype, but I I ended up doing this because I felt and saw that it was needed to do. Honestly, I kind of wish this work wasn't needed and then I could go do something else. But I feel kind of obligated to work on this problem because I see the problem and I know what changes need to be done to make things better. And until the problem is gone, I can't stop. It's kind of one of the autistic stereotypes I really do fit is like when I become kind of fixated or obsessed on a problem, I can't let go of it until it's solved. And this problem probably won't be solved in my lifetime, unfortunately.
Wow. Yes, for me, when I was really young, probably about age of 5 or 6, I used to really like cars. My dad used to work on cars a lot. He had a lot of friends that were mechanics and worked on cars. And I remember asking him, who designs cars? And he said, engineers. And so from that point on, I thought I wanted to be an engineer, but quite frankly, I wasn't quite sure, how to get there and how to do it. I explained a little bit about, my path and, my journey and my education that ultimately got me on the path to do this. But what I later realized was that engineering could take me into a multitude of career paths. What I do now, quite frankly, doesn't require having an engineering degree. However, that path provided a very strong foundation for problem solving that gave me the confidence and the ability to do what I do today.
Amazing. Yeah, that's so inspiring to hear. And if someone were interested in entering your respective fields, what type of educational or professional background would they need, and what could help someone out during the application process when they're trying to get a foot in the door?
Now, for me, I took a very non-traditional approach to employment. I didn't know I was autistic when I was in the education system, and so I did very poorly being in education without having my needs accommodated. And so when I left school, I didn't think I was really capable of learning. And then I discovered self-learning on my own. And I started entering the workforce I had my first like management job in a fast food restaurant when I was like 17. And then I went on to like becoming a manager and trainer in like retail. And then I worked in a corporate materials hardware library, managing things like that. I was one of the first people to hold a terabyte hard drive back when we couldn't talk about such a thing existing yet. It was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is going to change the world. But I can't tell anybody it exists. It was like really like cool to apply that into different scenarios. And since I didn't have the option available to me to go through traditional university at the time, um, my biggest strength was like when I went to any organization, I stayed there and built tenure, would stay for at least 4 or 5 years in each position if they treated me well enough. And whenever, because I was always, hired in or promoted up to leadership positions, a lot of times there were options to go get additional training that your organization would pay for. So in fast food, we joked and we called it the Burger University. And so I would go take all the leadership courses they would possibly give me so that I could learn about things. And every organization I went to was like, okay, leadership courses, yes, free. So like that was my non-traditional route to getting an education, was taking as many business and leadership courses as possible. And then, once the internet became around, you can even take leadership courses on like Udemy and things like that. It's like really affordable. And so I went a non-traditional route to really focus on my spiky skills and ability, because I'm a kind of person that I'm not well-rounded in education. For example, I did really terrible at history and science. Those weren't my things, but I did really well in like literature and writing and other subjects, music, art, like those were really good. So I was able to lean into my skills in a very unique way, and also applying all the things I learned as a leader, in the roughly 15, 17 years leading up to when I first entered the workforce to when I found out I was autistic. And so that was my non-traditional route. Other than that, if you're more traditional, you could probably become a business consultant if you go to like university and do the business degree. That would be like if you're more traditional and you want something more concrete. But the thing that I want people to understand is, even if you have an obstacle that prevents you from going the traditional route, if you are passionate and you want to know something, the information is most likely out there, or you can find a mentor who can help teach you things. Because that was the other thing that was really key to my success, is any workplace I entered, because I didn't have a lot of the knowledge going in. It was like I would look for the person who was a teacher, like who naturally liked to mentor other people, and I would stick close to that person so that I could learn as much as I could from someone who really cared to share their knowledge with other people. And that's just been something that my whole life I've like kind of like look for people that are willing to help, and because some people are just really dismissive, and so finding those kind people that can be really be beneficial, especially in any new space you enter, whether it's like a classroom or a workplace.
Yeah, that's great. I really love what you said, Lyric. As I mentioned, when you look at what I do in supply chain, even though there are schools and colleges that offer supply chain degrees and curriculum today, um, most people that I know who do what I do not have a degree in supply chain. There's a multitude of different ways for you to enter the profession. There's some people have business degrees, but quite frankly, the foundational educational backgrounds are quite frankly all over the place. Fundamentally, I think what's most important is, people who have the ability to influence, people who have strong people skills, the ability to engage and partner and collaborate. And I think, to Lyric's point, and if you didn't pick this up, it's something that I definitely picked up from her, is she's a lifelong learner, right? And that is so important. I tell people, even though most people didn't know what supply chain was until relatively recently, if you go back, say a decade or 2 decades ago, what supply chain was then is quite a bit different than what it is today. And it is a profession that continues to evolve. And so it is important to be a life learner, because even if you did get educated and had some foundational understanding what that was some time ago, that would be obsolete today. And so, just having the ability and the desire to continue to learn, taking advantage of all the resources around you. And there will be a lot, right? Some formal, some informal. When I look at today, the resources that are available through the internet, as an example, there's just a ton of resources that anybody can get access to that can enable that.
Yeah, really insightful stuff. Thank you both. And I love what you said about being a lifelong learner. I think that's definitely important for many fields, just to keep having that drive, that passion, and never feeling like you know everything. So really relatable. My next question is, can you just share some interview tips? Because that is, kind of the first step to getting your dream job. So any interview tips that either of you have, would love to hear them.
Yeah. So I will say, especially for autistic people, it can be really hard to know how to sell yourself in an interview. And so really reflecting on like what you bring to the workplace, and like really you have to learn to look at yourself favorably, because a lot of autistic and neurodivergent people, because we've been told we're not enough too often, like we look at ourselves with a really critical lens, and it can be hard for us to tell people how awesome we are. And so I really encourage you to practice and start thinking about ways you're awesome. And you should do this anyway. Like you should be really think in general, but especially like for an interview, because unfortunately, it's often this game of what do you bring to the table, and so you have to be able to like say what it is you bring to the table. And then the other thing I would say is, tying into what we spoke about earlier, like a lot of times job interviews will have this list of like all the dream qualities they think they want in a candidate, and it isn't even necessarily realistic, and a lot of times they're describing something that's not even a person, there's not out there. So even if you don't fit a job description perfectly, maybe you don't have all the qualifications, or you don't have everything they're looking for, but you can learn how to do the job based on what they're actually asking you to do, to apply anyway. And when you go into that interview, like if you've applied and you don't have everything, say, hey, look, I want to be really transparent. I don't have this degree, but I'm confident I can learn to do these tasks, or but I already know how to do these tasks, or I've done these tasks before, or or if you're a lifelong learner and you're really good at self-teaching yourself and figuring things out. Like I've gotten jobs that I didn't know how to do a lot of the basic job tasks they wanted me to know how to do starting, but because I came in and I was like, hey, I'm really honest that I don't know how to do like a quarter of these tasks, but I want to tell you, I am very confident that I can get up to speed and learn those tasks within, whatever amount of time I thought I could realistically teach myself to do those things. And so like they included that, and like, okay, fine, we're hiring you with the condition that you learn how to do these tasks by this date. And so being really transparent, being really honest, not hiding your weaknesses, but coming with like solutions. Like if you have a disability, like you need accommodation, I would disclose that when you are going into that interview process, like when you're already a person and you're meeting them face to face. But it's like, hey, this is the accommodation I need, and then be really transparent with like how simple it is to accommodate you. Like maybe it's like, hey, because of my neurotype, I'm freshest after 10 a.m. And so it's like, can I shift my day to do 10 to 6 instead of 8 to 4? And it's like, okay, well, that's real simple. Or, you're maybe if it's possible to work remotely, like you've got some kind of health condition where you need to work remote, say, I can work best remotely, and you can provide examples for how you can get this done and how you'll stay in communication, and just come with solutions at the same time, because sometimes employers are afraid of the unknown, even though they shouldn't be.
Yeah, and Frank, what about you?
No, that's excellent input. I think one thing, even before you get to the interview, is to do your homework and make sure that the organization is a good cultural fit. I think oftentimes you find yourself in an interview where you're trying to sell yourself as a fit to what they're looking for. but I strongly believe it's a two-way street. You want to be pursuing something that is a strong cultural fit for you, that allows you to be your unique self, and in doing so, add value to the organization. And if you assess that and know there's a fit, then it's really important when you show up to the interview. In my mind, one of the key things is to be uniquely you. Be specific. Focus on what you have done, both personally and professionally, that demonstrate your passions, your interests, and skills that align to the organization and the role that you're pursuing. I also think it's really important that you don't be shy about sharing challenges and failures in your life and how you have overcome them. I'm always extremely wary of people who say that they haven't failed at anything. Because in the course of a career, you will run into a lot of obstacles and challenges. And I always want someone who has been knocked down and knows how to get up versus someone who has the risk of being knocked down for the first time in the opportunity and creates uncertainty around how they respond to continue to make sure that they can move forward.
Yeah, those are all super important. I mean, it's a lot about confidence and selling yourself, because if you believe in yourself, then that's going to come across to the employers. I really love what you both said about that, and just being authentic and true. So thank you both so much. My next question was actually going to be kind of on the same vein. Can you share some best practices when applying to jobs? And you both touched a bit on that, but is there anything else that you wanted to add in terms of best practices applying to jobs?
Yeah, so I would say definitely get your resume really tuned up and have people look at it that, have more work experience than you do, for sure. Have lots of people look at it and give you feedback on your resume before you start giving it out. And the other thing is make your resume colorful and fun and creative, but not, like not too over the top, but like, maybe you're using a colorful border or something. Like give it something that like makes it a bit memorable. I wouldn't necessarily include your face on it, because some organizations, like depending on certain rules and things, will have a problem with that. Just they don't want to see your face because they're trying to not have biases. So that would be just something to consider on when you're applying for places and jobs. But definitely take the time to really get that resume and that job history. And you might even have different versions of your resume depending on different industries and positions you're applying for. Different work experiences you have might be more relevant. And also, like when they have those cover letters, like really, or they're asking for a letter with it. Even if they aren't asking for that, if you really want this job, it's really good to like put that letter together and write why you think you want this job or why you think you'll be a great fit. Like give it your personality. It's more of that, that authentic you that we were talking about on the previous question. You want to have as much of the authentic you show through as possible. So like that cover letter that you send with your resume for application, whether they're asking for it or not, is that's you putting the you into it. Whereas the resume has all your accomplishments, which are part of you, but the resume is a lot more just like factoids, what you did, this is why, these are details. But that cover letter, that's your heart and soul, that you're bringing it all together. So like that stuff really can make or break like whether you're getting past getting a callback, because a lot of times when it starts out, because I have a history in recruiting, like we had sometimes 650 applicants for about 8 to 10 roles a year. And so that first stage where you get all these resumes and cover letters, if there's not something in there that really humanizes that and makes it stick out, it's just going to get lost in the pile. So that's the hard part, is for a lot of people even just getting that call back.
Excellent. I think, to build upon what I said before, I think first of all is looking for opportunities that allow you to follow your passion You know, any, I firmly believe that in order to be successful in anything, it just requires hard work. However, when you're doing something that aligns with your passion, it doesn't feel like work. Um, Time just passes. If you think about doing something, whether it's a professional thing or a personal thing that you really, really enjoy, just think about how fast the time passes. Um, Something that you can do all day and all night. And I always kind of tell people is you want to find something or pursue something where you're kind of surprised that they pay you to do it because you just love it so much. I think it's also important to when you're pursuing something to really leverage your network. And again, you know, in this world where we've got, you know, all types of social media, LinkedIn, etc., it's not it's not it's hard to find people, you know, who have connections, who have relevant roles or things that align to the organization or to the job that you're pursuing. Leverage those connections. Leverage insiders, people who can help influence, people who can help provide insight and referrals and connections that ultimately increase your probability or your odds at landing that dream role.
Yeah, that's for sure. Just spreading your net, making sure you're just taking advantage of all the opportunities around you. And I wanted to take a brief moment to just let all the awesome people in our audience, to let them know that we are going to have a section for your questions. So feel free to throw the questions in the chat, and I will make sure to pass them on to our panelists during the last 10 or so minutes of the discussion. We're winding down our Q&A here, so I will just move it right along. Next question I have is, what do you wish someone had told you about this field before you entered it?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I wish I would have really had some understanding of how to better pace myself. Uh, because when you're an independent business consultant, it can be really scary to not have a stable income. Like for most of my life, when I was an independent consultant and when I was consulting in somebody else's firm, I had a paycheck, like a regular paycheck. And so like when I first started out as an independent consultant, I really almost burnt myself out and overworked myself, which is like one of the main things I didn't want to do, because I would take every single piece of like anything that came my way because I was so scared like there would be times when there wouldn't be work. And that's true. There are times when there's like almost no work, and that's really scary still. But like I've learned through the years like to really find like my sweet spot in my niche as an independent consultant, the kinds of projects that like as was said earlier, when it doesn't feel like work, because it's like there's certain kinds of projects I can do that I enjoy doing, and there's certain other kinds of projects or maybe certain kinds of clients and people that I don't want to work with, because working on those types of projects or working with those types of people is just going to make my life stressful and miserable. And working on my own, I have the power, and that's probably the best part. So I need to take advantage of this to say, no, I'm not going to work with this client who is going to make my life a living heck, you know, because they're mean and they're nasty and they don't treat me with respect. I don't have to take those clients because I'm my own boss. And also, like, I've had to learn, like, oh, you know, I could do this really big project that technically I can do these tasks, but doing these tasks is not something I enjoy doing or really want to do. And just because I can do it doesn't mean I have to take it on. And so that's something I wish I would have understood when I started as an independent consultant, because I would do all kinds of things that I didn't really enjoy even doing. And I was just as miserable as when I worked for other people. So that wasn't like living and making the best of, you know, being my own boss. And so really understanding I really can make the rules. Like I really can make the rules as an independent consultant, and I don't have to work a traditional schedule, and I can customize everything that way, and not being trying to copy just the way every other corporation I've ever worked in, because I've, you know, worked in so many different places, not copying the way they're doing it, and really leaning into thinking differently about how life and work can be. And now that I've done that, it's just been it's been so freeing. And I don't think I'll ever be employable again now. I don't think I can ever imagine having a boss ever again now that I've really leaned into that. And that's been amazing.
Yeah, I think for me, as I mentioned before about the importance of finding something that you're really passionate about, I didn't start in a career path pursuing supply chain, but I kind of found my way toward it. And one of the things I realized was that it was an area that really did align very well with my passions, interest, and my background and my skills, right? And so therefore, for me, it doesn't feel like a job. And I definitely tend to think and focus a lot on the positives about the job in the career. I was even telling my daughter one day that she may want to consider, going in to a similar career path because I told her, I said, when you really think about it, I said, I get to travel to some extremely interesting places. I probably traveled to over 50 countries. I said, you get to eat at the finest restaurants, stay at the nicest hotels around the world, and meet a lot of interesting people. Um, and make a decent living on someone else's dime, and so um, when I think about where I grew up, where I came from, I mentioned my hometown. I literally remember when I was a kid standing in the middle of my street, looking west and looking east, and wondering what it was like on the other part of the country, not just the other part of the world, but other parts of the country, because growing up, I didn't really get to travel much. And when I think about what my career has meant in terms of just my life, well beyond the job and the work of the job, the core work, um, the things that's really expanded in terms of my exposure, my learning, my appreciation of what exists around the world. It's something I can't even put a price tag on it. And so if someone had told me this sooner, this is definitely a career path that I definitely would have more aggressively pursued much earlier in my career.
Excellent. And so I think we can shift to some audience questions. We've got the first ones. What are some tips for connecting with professionals in the career that you wish to pursue? You both talked a little bit about networking, but any tips on how to just get in there?
I can go first.
Oh yeah.
One of the things I recognize is that people are human beings, and human beings in general don't mind talking about themselves, or at least if you go to them and say, "Hey, I think you're great and this and that or whatever," right? Even busy people oftentimes will carve out time to kind of share tidbits and give you more perspective and insight based on your interest in them. And I think it's really important to leverage that, right? And we all have connections. I mentioned where I was from a hometown standpoint. It could be sports related, it could be common interests, whatever. But in the world of like LinkedIn, as an example, you don't have to know someone else. But if you have an aspiration for a career or job, yeah, I strongly advise people to do that. I say five people that you can identify that's doing that role or that job, and find a way to get connected to them, right? Through one of the means that I just kind of talked about, whether you know somebody who knows them or you got common interest, whatever. And when you go talk to them, ask them some of the same questions that you guys have been asking today, right? How did you get there? What were the required experiences? What were the required education? Um, Use that information to develop your own strategy, your own roadmap. And I often tell people, just like planning any trip, you'll often have detours. If you're planning on, going from New York to Chicago and you say you're going to drive, you may be going through one city that you had planned to, and then you may find out there's a flood in that city and you got to go around. It doesn't change your destination, right? It just puts you on a temporary detour. I think the same way when you're thinking about it, you're planning your career path, but that's kind of like framework that I would encourage people to think about and use in response to that question, Shweta.
All right. And I'll add on that a little bit. Like the technology age makes networking so like different than it would have been back before we had internet. And I would really encourage you when you're thinking about how you're going to network to think about like what your strengths are. If you're a really good verbal communicator and spoken communicator, and you do really good face-to-face networking, look for networking events to go to in person and like talk to people. If you're someone who likes happy hours and things, go to those. There's a lot. That's not for me. Like I've done networking that's more online and virtual. Like you can join, there's like Facebook groups for HR professionals I've joined because that was like my community. I was in HR and operations people. There are LinkedIn groups. You can connect with people on LinkedIn. Be willing to network in non-traditional ways, and also like especially if you're meeting people face to face and you're having Zoom calls with people because if you're meeting non-traditionally through technology, make real authentic connections with people. Sometimes people are always just like networking on a very shallow level. It's like, what can you do for me? What can I do for you? But like also really try to learn like who people are as a person, like make real authentic genuine connections with people, not these shallow just like what can you get from each other connections. Those connections are not going to be nearly as meaningful as the lifetime connections that you're making with people that you might be working with for 20 years. Like I've got a printing company now that I met several years ago, and I've used the same printing company now in 3 different companies I've worked for because we have a relationship with each other. And now on my own, I will still use the same printing company if I need printing for any reason because we've got that relationship. And it's not just like one time, I was like, what can we use this person for? It's like, these are people I trust. And I've built a lifelong, partnership with this business now. So because it was an authentic connection versus just something really shallow.
By the way, Lyric, just to add to what you just said, you remind me of something. I think it's important too, as you get to know people, to think about what you can do for them. To your point,
Yes.
not just what can I get from them, but what can I contribute to them that would be a benefit for them.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Really great, great input there. And this question is for Lyric. So when you decided to make the shift to working on your own, what are some of the things you took into account as you were planning your new business? We have a lot of students that are interested in entrepreneurship, so would love to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about me deciding to work on my own is I didn't really decide to work on my own. I was kind of pushed from the nest like a baby bird because I was working in this fantastic organization when the pandemic hit. I was the VP of marketing and working on shifting into launching a new neurodiversity initiative as a consultant in this other organization. But COVID hit. And being in a transitional period about to start something at the end of March, when all of a sudden everything changed, meant that it wasn't appropriate to launch a new service line when we were in the middle of just trying to survive as a business. And so several months later, by the fall, we had to let some people go. And me being at a time of transition, naturally, I was someone who was let go. And that was not a good time to be looking for work either, because there was so many organizations pushing out, especially DE&I people and people who were working on organizational culture and training, like that industry really was slim to nothing. And so honestly, I normally am someone who likes a lot of security. I loved knowing what my paycheck was going to be and knowing I'd have how much I'd have each month. And I probably wouldn't have made that jump because it was too scary if I hadn't been nudged. But then, kind of forced out on my own with not a lot of other options, I decided to start over and recreate that neurodiversity initiative that I had created in that other company. I had to start over because it was their intellectual property. I had done it working for them on their dime. So I started over recreating all of these things on my own. And I'm so glad I did it. I'm so glad I was pushed into an uncomfortable position because the considerations like that would have been scary to me is like not having a stable income. Like that's so scary. And if you need more stability, or if you're in a position where you can't have that, like maybe you might have a really slow month or two, or a really slow season, or a really slow quarter, if that's going to be a problem for you, working as an independent consultant might not be, the best course of action. But the other thing, now that I'm in it and I know, and why I say, even though I have the uncertainty, I'll take it, is I have so much freedom over, what I do, my work I take on, my schedule I work. and just not, for me, like I'm a very demand avoidant person, and having like a being micromanaged is like the worst, most stressful thing for me. And so being someone that needs a lot of control over their environment and their space, having all of that control takes just so much stress off of my life. And that it makes up for the stress of like, oh, this has been a really slow quarter. That's stressful, yeah. But not being micromanaged and having all that freedom took away a much bigger load of stress, so that I have more mental capacity to deal with the stress of, okay, the quarter was a little slow. Like I can handle that stress now because my stress load is less, because there's less stress on my life in general. So for me, thinking about like how much stress is going to be put on my life, I didn't used to think about that. But what led me to finding out I was autistic was I burned myself out, and I had a mental and physical health breakdown, and it made me have to be more aware of the impact that stress has on my body, because it can make me very unwell. So I have to minimize stress. And so now that I understand how much that actually matters to me, um, that's been something, like really realizing what stresses me out and how much stress can come from different things.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all, and I just want to give a moment for our president and CEO, Elsie, to give a closing remark and just close things out for us. So Elsie, take it away.
What I would say as an addition, Lyric and Frank have been wonderful and have shared a lot of their great creative wisdom. Thank you for that. But be proud of who you are, and don't try and be someone else. That position is already taken. Trumpet your diversity. So I'm neurodivergent, I'm dysgraphic, I'm dyslexic, and I'm ASD. It's good to double down on what you are rather than trying to start something else. So if you can find the strengths in your diversity, that's fantastic. And I think people look for that when they're looking for colleagues, people to work with.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Elsie. Thank you, Lyric. Thank you, Frank. We really, really appreciate you both being with us today. And thank you to our students who joined us, and for the program directors for getting everyone together. And hopefully we all took a lot from this. I know I did. So I will leave everyone with that. This recording will be available for anyone who didn't get to sign on today. So we'll be sharing that. But thank you again, and hope everyone has a good rest of the day and good rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.